Welcome back to another deep dive into the Wasteland's greatest mysteries. Before we begin this incredible journey, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more Fallout lore that will blow your mind. Picture this, October 23rd, 2077. The world burns in nuclear fire. 200 million people die in the first 2 hours. Entire civilizations are reduced to radioactive ash. But in the heart of the Mojave Desert, something impossible happens. As mushroom clouds bloom across the horizon, a wall of light erupts from the Lucky 38 casino. Missiles streak through the air, intercepting incoming nuclear warheads. Laser batteries hidden throughout Las Vegas roar to life, vaporizing atomic death before it can touch the city. Most of Vegas survives, while the rest of America becomes a hellscape of radiation and ruin. The neon lights of Sin City continue to flicker in the darkness. But here's the thing that will keep you awake at night. The man who saved Las Vegas had been dead for decades. Or had he? Robert Edwin House, the genius who built an empire from silicon and circuits, had somehow found a way to cheat death itself. Not just for a few years, not even for a few decades. For over 2 centuries, this brilliant madman would pull the strings of fate from the shadows of his tower. How does a human being survive 200 years in a post-nuclear wasteland? What kind of vision drives a man to preserve one city while the world burns around it? And most terrifying of all, what was House planning that required centuries of patient preparation? The Lucky 38 hums with mysterious energy. Its windows reflect the lights of a city that should not exist. And somewhere in its depths, connected to machines that blur the line between man and computer, Robert House continues his impossible vigil. The story you're about to hear will change everything you thought you knew about the Mojave Wasteland. But first, we need to go back. Back to before the bombs. Back to when Robert House was just a man with a calculator and a dream that would reshape the world. The year is 2020, and in a small house in Las Vegas, a child is learning that numbers never lie. They reveal patterns. They predict the future. And sometimes, if you're brilliant enough to read them correctly, they can help you become a god. The year 2070 was supposed to be humanity's golden age. Gleaming corporate towers pierced the sky like steel and glass mountains. Nuclear-powered cars hummed silently down pristine highways. Robots served drinks in chrome-plated diners, while television screens promised a future of endless prosperity. America had become a corporate wonderland where business dynasties ruled like digital kings, and the most powerful of these kings was a man who had started with nothing but a brilliant mind and an unshakable faith in the power of mathematics. Robert Edwin House entered the world on June 25, 2020, in Las Vegas, Nevada. Even as a child, there was something different about him. While other kids played with toys, young Robert played with probability equations. While they dreamed of cowboys and superheroes, he dreamed of circuit boards and profit margins. His parents quickly realized they had given birth to something extraordinary. A mathematical prodigy whose mind could process complex calculations faster than most computers of the era. By age 15, House had already designed his first computer program. By 20, he had patents worth millions. By 30, he controlled RobCo Industries, one of the most powerful technology corporations in the world. But Robert House wasn't just building a business empire. He was building the future itself. RobCo Industries became the beating heart of American technological innovation. Their computers controlled everything from household appliances to military defense systems. Their robots worked in factories, cleaned houses, and even served as companions for lonely families. House's Pip-Boys became standard equipment for Vault Tech's underground shelters. His Protectrons stood guard in banks and shops across the nation. Every aspect of pre-war life was somehow touched by Robert House's technological vision. But it was in Las Vegas where House truly showed his genius. The city that had once been built on gambling and entertainment was being transformed into something unprecedented. House didn't just want to own casinos. He wanted to reimagine what a city could be. His plans called for massive construction projects that would turn Vegas into a jewel of the atomic age. Climate-controlled domes, underground transportation networks, residential complexes that looked like something from a science fiction movie. Those who met Robert House during these years described him as a man who seemed to live in the future, while everyone else was stuck in the present. He spoke in precise, calculated sentences. He never made a decision without running the numbers first. Some called him cold. Others called him brilliant. But everyone agreed on one thing. Robert House saw patterns that other people missed. He was a man who could look at a stock market report and predict political upheaval, who could analyze population growth and forecast resource wars decades in advance, who could study human behavior and design systems that would influence society on a massive scale. House didn't just understand technology. He understood people. And he understood that people, unlike machines, were fundamentally flawed and unpredictable. This understanding would become both his greatest strength and his deepest source of isolation. House's personality was as complex as his business empire. To his employees, he was a demanding perfectionist who expected nothing less than excellence. To his competitors, he was a ruthless strategist who played the corporate game better than anyone alive. To the few people he considered friends, he was a visionary who spoke passionately about humanity's potential for greatness. But to himself, in the quiet moments between board meetings and product launches, Robert House was a man who had begun to see the cracks in the foundation of civilization itself. The resource. Wars were spreading across the globe. Nations fought over oil and uranium while their populations grew hungrier and more desperate. The American government was making deals with shadowy organizations like Vault Tech, building underground shelters for reasons they wouldn't discuss publicly. And somewhere in the vast network of data that flowed through RobCo's computer systems, Robert House was detecting patterns that filled him with a cold mathematical certainty. Nuclear war wasn't just possible. It was inevitable. As House stood in his penthouse office in the Lucky 38 casino, looking out over the lights of Las Vegas in the year 2075, he faced a choice that would define the next 2 centuries of human history. He could accept the coming apocalypse as unavoidable and focus on saving himself. Or he could attempt something that had never been tried before. He could try to save an entire city. The decision he made in that moment would require him to become something more than human, something that could survive the end of the world and guide humanity through the darkness that would follow. But first, he would need to build the most sophisticated bunker ever conceived. He would need to create an army of robots loyal only to him. And he would need to develop technology so advanced that it could function perfectly for centuries without maintenance. The clock was ticking. And somewhere in a warehouse in New Mexico, a courier was being hired to deliver a small platinum chip that would either save Las Vegas or do it forever. The first signs appeared in 2065, hidden in economic data that only someone like Robert House would notice. Oil consumption rates were climbing exponentially, while proven reserves dwindled at an alarming pace. The European Commonwealth had dissolved into warring city-states. China's annexation of Alaska had triggered a cascade of diplomatic failures that sent shockwaves through every major power structure on Earth. But these weren't just geopolitical crises to House. They were mathematical certainties playing out. Exactly as his models had predicted years earlier, House spent countless nights in his private study, surrounded by walls of monitors displaying real-time data from around the globe. Stock market fluctuations, military buildup reports, resource allocation studies, population migration patterns. To anyone else, it would have looked like chaos. To Robert House, It was a symphony of inevitability. Every graph, every trending line, every statistical anomaly pointed toward the same inescapable conclusion. Nuclear war would come within the next 15 years. The revelation didn't fill him with despair. House had never been a man driven by emotion. Instead, he felt something closer to relief. Finally, the uncertainty was over. He knew what was coming, which meant he could prepare for it. But preparation on this scale would require resources, technology, and most importantly, time. 12 years wasn't nearly enough to save the world, but it might be sufficient to save one small piece of it. House began his preparations with characteristic methodical precision. He liquidated non-essential assets, converting billions of dollars into raw materials, advanced technology, and strategic real estate. He purchased land throughout the Mojave Desert under various shell companies. He commissioned studies on underground construction, radiation shielding, and life support systems that could function independently for decades. Most importantly, he began development on what would become known as the platinum chip. A platinum chip wasn't just another piece of RobCo technology. It was House's masterpiece, a quantum leap in artificial intelligence and automated systems. Control. The chip contained an operating system so advanced that it could upgrade his entire Securitron robot network from basic security units into a fully autonomous military force. With the platinum chip installed, House's robots would possess tactical capabilities rivaling any human army. They could coordinate complex operations, adapt to changing battlefield conditions, and most crucially, remain absolutely loyal to Robert House, regardless of external circumstances. But creating the chip was only half the challenge. House also needed to build the infrastructure that would keep him alive long enough to use it. The Lucky 38 Casino, already an impressive architectural achievement, was secretly being converted into the most sophisticated survival bunker ever constructed. Beneath its Art Deco exterior, House installed medical equipment that could maintain human life indefinitely, computer systems that could monitor and control every electronic device in Las Vegas, communication arrays that could reach across continents, and defensive systems that could intercept incoming missiles with surgical precision. The bunker's life support system was perhaps House's greatest technical achievement. Using a combination of advanced medical technology and computer-assisted life preservation, House designed a system that could maintain his body in a state of suspended animation while keeping his mind fully active and connected to the outside world. It was a delicate balance between life and death, consciousness and coma, humanity and machinery. House would become something unprecedented in human history. A man who could live for centuries while remaining mentally sharp and strategically capable. As the resource wars intensified, House watched his predictions unfold with grim satisfaction. The Battle of Anchorage raged for over a decade, consuming resources and lives on an industrial scale. The new plague swept through densely populated areas, killing millions and destabilizing entire regions. Food riots erupted in major cities as agricultural output couldn't keep pace with demand. Each crisis brought the world closer to the nuclear precipice House had foreseen. During these years, House began to understand the true scope of the conspiracy surrounding him. Vault-Tec wasn't just building shelters for wealthy clients. They were conducting massive social experiments, treating the coming apocalypse as an opportunity to study human behavior under extreme conditions. The government wasn't trying to prevent nuclear war. They were preparing to wage it on their own terms. Even his business competitors seemed to know something catastrophic was approaching, though none of them possessed House's analytical capabilities or long-term vision. This knowledge isolated House even further from his fellow human beings. How could he maintain normal relationships when he knew that everyone he cared about would likely be dead within a few years? How could he engage in typical business dealings when the entire economic system was about to collapse? House began to withdraw from social interactions, spending more time alone with his calculations and preparations. His employees noticed the change, but attributed it to the stress of running a massive corporation during increasingly turbulent times. The personal cost of House's prescience was enormous. He watched old friends make plans for futures that would never arrive. He attended business meetings where executives discussed 5-year projections for industries that wouldn't exist in 5 months. He saw young couples getting married and starting families, never knowing that they were bringing children into a world that was about to end. House wanted to warn them, but he knew that revealing his knowledge would only create panic without preventing the disaster. Instead, he channeled his energy into perfecting his survival strategy. Every system had backup systems. Every backup had redundancies. Every redundancy was tested and retested until House was satisfied it would function flawlessly when needed. He couldn't save everyone, but he could save Las Vegas. And if Las Vegas survived, it could become the foundation for rebuilding civilization according to his vision of progress and rationality. House's preparations took on an almost religious intensity as 2077 approached. He worked 18-hour days, sleeping only when his body demanded rest. He hired the best engineers, scientists, and technicians money could buy, though none of them knew the true purpose of their work. To them, they were simply building advanced casino security systems and luxury amenities for VIP guests. Only House knew they were constructing humanity's last hope. The platinum chip neared completion in early 2077, representing the culmination of decades of research and development. But House faced a critical problem. The chip was too valuable and too dangerous to transport using normal security methods. He needed someone completely outside the existing power structures. Someone who wouldn't ask questions or have divided loyalties. Someone who could deliver the chip safely to the Lucky 38 just before the bombs began to fall. Finding such a courier proved more difficult than anticipated. House's usual contacts were either too well known or too unreliable for such a crucial mission. He needed someone with the skills to handle dangerous cargo, but without the curiosity to investigate what they were carrying. Someone competent, but not brilliant. Someone trustworthy, but not irreplaceable. As October 2077 arrived, House felt the weight of history pressing down on him. Everything he had built, everything he had planned, everything he hoped to achieve depended on the next few weeks going exactly according to his calculations. The platinum chip had to reach him before the nuclear exchange began. His defensive systems had to function perfectly when the missiles started flying. His life support systems had to activate flawlessly when the radiation clouds rolled across the desert. But even Robert House, with all his computational power and strategic genius, couldn't account for every variable. The courier he had chosen seemed reliable, but House had learned that human beings were fundamentally unpredictable. The defensive systems had been tested exhaustively, but they had never faced an actual nuclear bombardment. The life support technology was revolutionary, but it had never been used for extended periods on a human subject. As House stood in his penthouse office for what might be the last time, watching the sun set over Las Vegas, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Doubt, not about his calculations or his preparations, but about whether any human being had the right to make the decisions he was making. Was he saving civilization, or was he simply ensuring his own survival at the expense of everyone else? The question would haunt him for the next 2 centuries. But first, he had to survive the next 24 hours. October 20th, 2077. 3 days before the world ended, Robert House made the phone call that would determine the fate of New Vegas. The number belonged to a courier service, operating out of the hub, small enough to avoid government attention. but professional enough to handle sensitive deliveries. House had spent months vetting potential carriers, analyzing their routes, success rates, and most importantly, their tendency to ask uncomfortable questions about their cargo. The courier, who answered his call, seemed perfect for the job. Experienced but not overly curious. Reliable but not connected to any major factions. House provided minimal details. Pick up a package from a RobCo facility outside Sunnyvale. Deliver it to the Lucky 38 in New Vegas by October 22nd. Payment upon delivery. No questions asked. The courier accepted without hesitation, unaware that they were now carrying the future of human civilization in their travel bag. House had designed the platinum chips container to look unremarkable. A simple metal case, slightly larger than a poker chip, with no external markings to indicate its contents. To casual inspection, it appeared to be nothing more than another corporate trinket or promotional item. Even if someone opened the case, the chip itself looked like an expensive but ordinary piece of computer hardware. Only House knew that it contained quantum-encrypted programming, capable of revolutionizing robotic warfare. While the courier began their journey south, House initiated the final phase of his preparation. The Lucky 38's transformation from luxury, casino to survival bunker, had taken years to complete, but the activation process would happen in a matter of hours. Hidden panels slid away to reveal sophisticated sensor arrays. Decorative elements rotated to expose defensive weapon systems. The building's elegant facade remained unchanged, but beneath its surface, the Lucky 38 had become a fortress capable of withstanding direct nuclear attack. Securitron Army was already in position throughout Las Vegas, though they appeared to be nothing more than advanced security robots to outside observers. Each unit was equipped with basic defensive protocols and crowd control capabilities. But once the Platinum chip upgraded their systems, these same robots would become tactical units capable of coordinated military operations. They could establish patrol routes, identify threats, and engage hostile forces with precision that surpassed human soldiers. The life support chamber represented House's most ambitious technological achievement. Located in the deepest level of the Lucky 38, the chamber combined medical technology, computer interfaces, and life preservation systems into a seamless integration of man and machine. House would enter the chamber conscious and emerge centuries later with his mind intact, but his body sustained by artificial means. It was a form of immortality that came at the cost of physical freedom, but House had calculated that the trade was worthwhile. As October 21st dawned, House received troubling intelligence reports from his network of informants. Military units were moving into position around major cities. Government officials were quietly evacuating to secure locations. Most ominously, several Vault-Tec facilities had sealed their entrances and gone into lockdown mode. House's timeline might be more compressed than he had originally calculated. House spent that day conducting final systems checks with obsessive thoroughness. Every sensor had to respond perfectly. Every weapon had to target accurately. Every computer had to process data flawlessly. He couldn't afford any technical failures when the crisis arrived. His engineers worked around the clock, fine-tuning systems they still didn't fully understand, while House monitored their progress from his private command center. The financial markets provided additional confirmation of House's predictions. Stock prices were fluctuating wildly as institutional investors liquidated positions and moved assets to secure offshore accounts. Gold prices had reached historic highs. Currency trading had become so volatile that several exchanges had temporarily suspended operations. The smart money was preparing for global economic collapse, which meant the smart bonds wouldn't be far behind. House's personal preparations were equally methodical. He had already transferred operational control of RobCo Industries to automated systems that could function independently for decades. His financial assets had been converted into physical resources, stored in secure locations throughout the Mojave. Most importantly, he had recorded detailed instructions for his future self, anticipating that emerging from extended life support might leave him disoriented and confused. The couriers' progress had been slower than expected. Traffic congestion, road construction, and increased military checkpoints had delayed their journey by several hours. House monitored their location through discrete tracking devices embedded in the package, growing increasingly concerned as time passed. Every hour of delay increased the probability that nuclear war would begin before the platinum chip reached its destination. October 22nd arrived with ominous news reports. Chinese naval forces had been detected approaching the Alaskan coast. American missile defense systems had been activated along the west coast. Several major cities had implemented emergency protocols usually reserved for imminent attack scenarios. House knew that military commanders on both sides were now operating under procedures that could trigger automatic retaliation if certain thresholds were crossed. House made the decision to enter his life support chamber that afternoon, despite the courier's continued absence. His calculations indicated that nuclear exchange would begin within hours, and he couldn't risk being caught outside his protective systems when the missiles started flying. The chamber's activation sequence required 30 minutes to complete, during which House would be completely vulnerable. He couldn't afford to wait any longer. The transition into life support was unlike anything House had ever experienced. As the medical systems activated, he felt his body growing numb while his mind remained sharp and focused. Monitors displayed his vital signs in real time, showing how the machines were gradually taking over biological functions. His organs could no longer perform reliably. It wasn't painful, but it was profoundly alien, like becoming a ghost haunting his own body. House's last conscious act before entering full life support was activating this Lucky 38's defensive systems. Laser batteries powered up along the casino's exterior. Missile interception systems calibrated their targeting protocols. Sensor networks extended their coverage across the entire Las Vegas metropolitan area. If nuclear weapons targeted the city, House would be ready to defend it. But as he drifted into the strange twilight between consciousness and unconsciousness that the life support system required, House realized he had made a critical error in his calculations. The courier still hadn't arrived, which meant the platinum chip was somewhere in the Wasteland, undelivered and unprotected. Without the chip, his Securitron army would remain limited to basic functions. Without upgraded robots, his plans for post-war reconstruction would be severely compromised. House had spent years preparing for every possible contingency except the most human one of all. Sometimes, despite the best planning and most careful preparation, people simply failed to show up when needed. The courier carrying humanity's future had vanished into the chaos of a world on the brink of destruction, and Robert House could do nothing but wait in his mechanical cocoon for whatever came next. Outside, the sun was setting over Las Vegas for what many believed would be the last time. Inside the Lucky 38, Robert House began his long journey into an uncertain future, sustained by machines and driven by a vision of human progress that might never be realized. The platinum chip was out there somewhere, carrying the key to his dreams or the proof of his ultimate failure. Tomorrow, the world would discover which possibility would define the next 2 centuries of human history. October 23rd, 2077, 9:47 a.m. Pacific Time. The world ended not with a whimper, but with the coordinated launch of thousands of nuclear warheads that would reshape the face of human civilization in the span of 2 hours. But in Las Vegas, Robert House was ready. The first wave of Chinese ICBMs appeared on House's detection systems at 9:42 a.m. Their trajectories calculated and analyzed by quantum computers faster than human reflexes could process. 13 warheads were targeting the Las Vegas metropolitan area, each one capable of turning the entire city into a radioactive crater. House's defensive systems had less than 6 minutes to intercept them all. The lucky 38's rooftop arrays erupted with lethal precision. Laser batteries that had been disguised as decorative elements swiveled toward incoming threats, their targeting computers calculating intercept angles with mathematical perfection. The first warhead died in a flash of coherent light 70 miles above the desert, its nuclear payload detonating harmlessly in the upper atmosphere. The second fell to a missile launched from a hidden installation near Fremont Street. The third succumbed to a directed energy weapon that had been concealed inside a casino advertisement. One by one, House's defenses eliminated the incoming threats. But the system wasn't perfect, and nuclear warfare had never been tested on this scale before. 2 warheads penetrated the defensive grid, detonating southwest of the city proper. The explosions vaporized several suburban communities and bathed the entire region in electromagnetic pulses that would have crippled any conventional electronics system. House felt the shockwaves through the lucky 38's superstructure, a deep rumbling that seemed to shake the very foundations of reality. His monitoring systems registered massive spikes in radiation levels, atmospheric pressure changes, and seismic activity. But the casino remained standing, its reinforced construction and advanced shielding protecting both the building and its occupant from the nuclear holocaust raging outside. The success was intoxicating. House had done what no other human being had managed to accomplish. He had looked into the face of nuclear annihilation and emerged victorious. Las Vegas still existed while reports flooded in of other major cities being completely destroyed. Washington, D.C. was gone. New York was a smoking ruin. Los Angeles had been hit by multiple warheads and was burning across its entire metropolitan area. But Las Vegas, House's city, survived. The triumph was short-lived. Within minutes of the nuclear exchange, House's life support systems began registering critical malfunctions. The electromagnetic pulses from the nearby detonations had damaged circuits that his engineers had assured him were completely hardened against such interference. Backup systems activated automatically, but they too showed signs of instability. House realized with growing horror that his technological masterpiece might not be as invulnerable as he had calculated. The system failures cascaded through his support network with terrifying speed. First, the primary consciousness interface began experiencing intermittent outages. House found himself disconnected from external sensors for minutes at a time, blind to what was happening in the world outside his bunker. Then the medical monitoring systems started producing erratic readings, unable to properly regulate the delicate balance of chemicals and nutrients, keeping his body alive. House fought to maintain control as his carefully designed systems betrayed him one by one. He tried to initiate manual overrides, but the interface controls were becoming increasingly unresponsive. The quantum computers that processed his thoughts and transmitted his commands were succumbing to radiation damage that shouldn't have been possible. His perfect plan was unraveling in real time, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The final system failure was the most cruel. House's communication array, which would have allowed him to coordinate with his Securitron forces and begin immediate post-war reconstruction, suffered a catastrophic power surge that knocked it completely offline. In the space of 30 minutes, House went from being the master of Las Vegas to being trapped in a technological tomb, with no way to influence the world beyond his walls. As his consciousness faded into the mechanical twilight of emergency life support, House experienced something that all his calculations had failed to predict: helplessness. For the first time in his adult life, Robert House was not in control of his circumstances. The man who had built an empire through force of will and superior intellect was now completely dependent on machines that were failing around him. The last thing House perceived before losing consciousness was a message from his external monitoring systems. The courier carrying the platinum chip had been found dead near Good Springs, apparently killed during the initial chaos of the nuclear exchange. The chip itself was missing, presumably taken by whoever had murdered its carrier. House's ultimate weapon, the key to his entire post-war strategy, was now in unknown hands while he lay helpless and unconscious. The irony was devastating. House had survived nuclear war only to be defeated by the very technology he had trusted to preserve him. His defensive systems had worked perfectly, saving Las Vegas from direct destruction. But his life support systems, damaged by the same electromagnetic forces his weapons had created, condemned him to decades of unconsciousness, while the world struggled to rebuild itself without his guidance. House's Securitrons continued operating on their basic programming, patrolling the streets of Las Vegas and maintaining minimal order among the survivors. But without the platinum chip upgrade, they remained simple security robots, incapable of the sophisticated operations House had envisioned for post-war reconstruction. They could prevent looting and maintain basic infrastructure, but they couldn't implement the grand vision of renewal that House had spent years planning. Las Vegas became a strange anomaly in the post-war world. While other cities lay in radioactive ruins, Vegas glowed with electric light and maintained a semblance of pre-war civilization. But it was a city without a leader, protected by robots that followed simple directives, while their creator lay unconscious in the depths of the Lucky 38. Survivors who emerged from their shelters found a functioning city that seemed to run itself, unaware that their salvation was both miraculous and deeply incomplete. The tribal communities that had lived in the surrounding desert before the war began to notice Las Vegas almost immediately. Here was a source of clean water, electric, power, and technology that worked reliably in a world where such things had become impossibly rare. But the Securitrons prevented any organized approach to the city, following protocols that House had established to protect Las Vegas from exactly such intrusion. Years passed in this strange stalemate. Las Vegas maintained itself through automated systems while House remained trapped in his failing life support chamber, neither fully alive nor entirely dead. The city became a beacon of hope for Wasteland travelers, visible from miles away, but ultimately inaccessible to those who needed its resources most. House had succeeded in preserving Las Vegas, but his victory felt more like a punishment than a triumph. The platinum chip remained lost somewhere in the wasteland, its location unknown to anyone who might have understood its significance. Perhaps it lay buried in some raider camp, mistaken for worthless pre-war junk. Perhaps it had been damaged beyond repair during the chaos of the Great War. Or perhaps it waited patiently in some forgotten bunker, its quantum-encrypted secrets intact but useless without House's conscious will to activate them. House's dreams during these lost years were filled with visions of what Las Vegas could have become under his guidance. He saw great construction projects that would have restored the city's glory. He witnessed negotiations with emerging factions that could have established lasting peace. He experienced technological innovations that would have elevated human civilization beyond its pre-war achievements. But these remained only dreams, phantoms created by a mind trapped between consciousness and oblivion. The real Las Vegas continued. Its automated existence, beautiful but static, advanced but stagnant. Robert House had cheated death and saved his city, but in doing so, he had perhaps denied both himself and Las Vegas the chance to truly live. The man who had built his empire on the principle that human ingenuity could overcome any obstacle had discovered the one problem his intellect couldn't solve. Sometimes survival isn't enough. Sometimes you need to be awake to enjoy the victory you fought so hard to achieve. For 61 years, Las Vegas existed in a state of artificial perfection. While the rest of America transformed into a wasteland of radiation and despair, the city that Robert House had protected continued functioning with clockwork precision. Street lights illuminated empty avenues every evening. Water treatment facilities purified Lake Mead's contents without human oversight. Power plants generated electricity that nobody used except the machines themselves. The Securitrons patrolled, their designated routes with mechanical dedication, their basic programming intact despite the absence of their creator's consciousness. They maintained order in a city that had no citizens, protected infrastructure that served no immediate purpose, and waited for instructions that would not come for decades. To any outside observer, it would have appeared that House's grand experiment had succeeded beyond all expectations. The illusion of success was remarkably convincing. Las Vegas stood as the only major population center in the former United States that retained most of its pre-war functionality. The casinos still had power. The hotels still had running water. The transportation system still operated on schedule, even though there were no passengers to transport. It was a ghost city that refused to acknowledge its own death. But beneath this veneer of technological triumph, critical systems were slowly degrading without proper maintenance. House's automated repair protocols could handle routine problems, but they lacked the creativity and adaptability that complex urban infrastructure required. Pipes developed leaks that were patched rather than replaced. Computer systems accumulated errors that were masked rather than corrected. The city was living on borrowed time, consuming its own resources without replenishing them. The Securitrons themselves embodied this gradual decline. Their basic programming was sufficient for simple security tasks, but they couldn't adapt to the changing needs of post-war survival. When raiders approached the city outskirts, the robots would drive them away according to their perimeter defense protocols. But they couldn't negotiate with peaceful travelers who might have contributed to the city's recovery. They couldn't establish trade relationships with emerging settlements. They couldn't even communicate effectively with the tribal groups that were beginning to coalesce around the Mojave Desert. The tribal situation was becoming particularly complex. The Great War had scattered many Native American communities, forcing survivors to band together in new configurations based on mutual survival rather than traditional cultural bonds. These groups were drawn to the Las Vegas area by its obvious prosperity and technological advantages. Clean water was scarce throughout the wasteland, but Las Vegas had functioning treatment facilities. Medical supplies were nearly impossible to find elsewhere, but the city's hospitals still contained pre-war pharmaceuticals and climate-controlled storage. 3 major tribal groups had established territories within a day's march of Las Vegas. By the 2120s, the group that would eventually become known as the Chairman had claimed the areas around what had been Henderson, surviving primarily through scavenging and small-scale agriculture. The future kings had settled near the old McCarran Airport, using its runways as gathering spaces and its hangars as communal shelters. The tribe that would transform into the White Glove Society had made their home in the mountains northwest of the city, developing a sophisticated understanding of wilderness survival and resource management. Each group had attempted to establish contact with Las Vegas multiple times over the decades. They could see the lights blazing every night, proof that someone or something inside the city had access to unlimited power and advanced technology. But every approach was met by Securitrons that followed their programming with inflexible determination. No unauthorized personnel were permitted within city limits. No exceptions would be made for special circumstances. No negotiations were possible with entities that lacked proper security clearances. The tribal leaders grew frustrated with this mechanical stubbornness, but they also recognized that direct confrontation would be suicidal. The Securitrons might be limited in their capabilities, but they were still military-grade robots equipped with sophisticated weapon systems. Any attempt to force entry into Las Vegas would result in a massacre that would devastate the tribal populations. So they waited, developing their own societies while keeping careful watch on the enigmatic city that dominated their region. This waiting period allowed each tribal group to develop distinctive cultural characteristics that would serve them well. In later years, the future chairmen became experts at organization and logistics, skills that were essential for coordinating large-scale scavenging operations. The proto-kings developed a fascination with pre-war entertainment culture, particularly music and performance art that helped maintain morale during difficult times. The White Glove Society ancestors focused on refinement and sophistication, believing that maintaining civilized behavior was crucial for psychological survival in an uncivilized world. House's unconscious mind remained dimly aware of these developments. Through the fragmentary data his monitoring systems could still collect, his dreams were filled with images of tribal camps and frustrated negotiations, but he couldn't process this information clearly enough to understand its implications. The electromagnetic damage to his life support systems had created a strange, twilight state where he could perceive events without being able to respond to them effectively. Meanwhile, the broader Wasteland was developing its own political dynamics that would eventually converge on the Mojave Desert. In California, the survivors of various military installations and government bunkers were beginning to organize themselves into what would become the new California Republic. Their goal was to restore democratic governance and rule of law to as much territory as possible, using pre-war American ideals as their foundation. But their expansion eastward was slow and methodical, limited by their commitment to establishing stable institutions rather than simply conquering territory. From the opposite direction, a very different kind of organization was taking shape. Along the Colorado River, Edward Sallow, a former follower of the Apocalypse who had been captured by a tribal group called the Blackfoot, was transforming himself into Caesar and building an empire based on classical Roman military principles. His legion was aggressively expansionist, absorbing or destroying tribal communities as it moved westward toward California. The collision between these two radically different approaches to post-war governance was inevitable, and Las Vegas occupied the most strategically important position along their mutual border. House's city represented something that neither this NCR nor Caesar's legion could easily comprehend or incorporate into their worldviews. Here was a functioning pre-war settlement that clearly possessed advanced technology and significant defensive capabilities, but which showed no interest in territorial expansion or political alliances. The secure trends suggested military strength, but their passive behavior indicated no aggressive intentions. Las Vegas was an anomaly that complicated every strategic calculation both factions made about controlling the region. The NCR scouts reported back with descriptions that strained credibility. A city with electric lights and running water, defended by an army of robots that never seemed to need rest or resupply. Government officials in Shady Sands debated whether Las Vegas represented a potential ally, a dangerous threat, or simply an elaborate mirage created by desert conditions and wishful thinking. Some argued for immediate diplomatic contact, while others advocated for military reconnaissance to determine the city's true capabilities. Caesar's approach was characteristically different. He viewed Las Vegas as a test of his legion's strength and his own tactical genius. Any settlement that could maintain pre-war technology obviously possessed resources that would be valuable for his empire. More importantly, conquering such an apparently impregnable target would demonstrate the legion's superiority over the soft, technology-dependent civilizations of the Old World. Caesar began planning campaigns that would bring his forces to the Colorado River and eventually to the gates of Las Vegas itself, but both factions were operating with incomplete information. They could observe Las Vegas from a distance, but they couldn't understand that the city's apparent strength was actually a carefully maintained illusion. The Securitrons were formidable within their programmed parameters, but they lacked the strategic flexibility that real military commanders could provide. The infrastructure was impressive, but it was slowly deteriorating without proper human oversight. Most crucially, the intelligence that had created this technological marvel was trapped in a mechanical coma, unable to adapt to changing circumstances or pursue long-term objectives. House's false conclusion was perhaps understandable given his circumstances. From his limited perspective, Las Vegas had survived the nuclear apocalypse and maintained its essential functions for over half a century. His defensive systems had worked. His robots had maintained order. His city had become a beacon of civilization in a world of chaos and destruction. By any reasonable measure, his plan had been a complete success. The reality was far more complex and far more fragile than House could perceive from his technological prison. Las Vegas was indeed a marvel of survival and engineering, but it was also a static monument to pre-war thinking that couldn't evolve. To meet post-war challenges, the city was slowly dying of its own perfection, too rigid to adapt and too isolated to grow. House had saved Las Vegas from nuclear destruction, but he had also condemned it to a kind of living death that might prove even more devastating in the long run. The wasteland that emerged from the ashes of the Great War was not the barren hellscape that pre-war doomsday theorists had predicted. Nature proved remarkably resilient, adapting to radiation with mutations that were often beneficial rather than destructive. Human communities sprouted like desert flowers after rain, each one finding unique ways to survive in conditions that would have seemed impossible before. 27-7 by 2100, the three tribal groups surrounding Las Vegas had developed into sophisticated societies with their own customs, technologies, and territorial boundaries. The tribe that would eventually become the chairman had mastered the art of urban scavenging, developing techniques for safely extracting valuable materials from the ruins of Henderson and Boulder City. Their scouts could identify useful pre-war technology from remarkable distances, and their engineers had learned to repair and modify electronic equipment using improvised tools and salvaged components. These future chairmen had also become skilled negotiators, a necessity when dealing with the dozens of smaller groups that moved through their territory. Caravans of traders, families of refugees, bands of prospectors, and occasionally more dangerous visitors all needed to be assessed and managed. The tribal leaders developed a reputation for fairness and pragmatism that made their territory relatively safe haven for peaceful travelers. This diplomatic approach would serve them well when they eventually encountered Robert House's more sophisticated political machinations. The group destined to become the kings had taken a different evolutionary path. Fascinated by the entertainment culture they discovered in the ruins of Las Vegas's outer districts, they began incorporating elements of pre-war performance art into their daily lives. Music became central to their social structure, with tribal status determined partly by musical ability and creativity. They developed elaborate ceremonies that combined traditional tribal elements with imagery borrowed from old-world concerts and theatrical productions. This cultural fusion created something entirely new in the post-war world. The proto-kings weren't simply imitating pre-war culture. They were transforming it into something that served their contemporary needs. Their music helped coordinate group activities, maintained morale during difficult periods, and provided a framework for resolving disputes without violence. By the 2120s, their territory had become known throughout the Mojave as a place where travelers could expect entertainment as well as basic hospitality. The ancestors of the White Glove Society had chosen perhaps the most challenging path of all. Rather than adapting to wasteland conditions, they had decided to maintain pre-war standards of civilization despite the harsh realities of post-apocalyptic survival. This meant developing sophisticated techniques for food preservation, water purification, and medical treatment using only materials they could scavenge or produce themselves. Their commitment to refinement in the face of barbarism created a unique cultural identity that emphasized education, artistic achievement, and social sophistication. Children were taught to read using salvaged books. Adults practiced formal etiquette, even when gathering around campfires. The tribe developed its own educational curriculum that combined practical survival skills with classical knowledge preserved from the old world. They became known for their medical expertise, with tribal healers who could treat conditions that would be fatal in other communities. These three groups existed in a delicate balance of cooperation and competition. Their territories overlapped, in places, creating opportunities for both trade and conflict. The chairman's scavenging operations sometimes encroached on areas the kings considered their performance menus. The White Glove Society's resource needs occasionally conflicted with the other tribes' more pragmatic approaches to environmental management. But all three groups understood that their proximity to Las Vegas created shared interests that outweighed their individual differences. The city itself remained tantalizingly close, yet impossibly distant. Every tribe had members who claimed to have approached the city limits, only to be turned away by Securitrons that communicated through pre-recorded messages in languages that had evolved significantly since 2077. The robots seemed capable of understanding basic intentions, but they couldn't engage in the kind of complex negotiations that might have led to meaningful contact. Tribal shamans and wise women developed elaborate theories about the nature of Las Vegas and its mechanical guardians. Some believed the city was inhabited by the ghosts of pre-war inhabitants who used robot bodies to interact with the physical world. Others thought Las Vegas had become a kind of technological purgatory where the souls of the war's victims were trapped in endless cycles of automated behavior. The most sophisticated tribal scholars suggested that the city might be controlled by an artificial intelligence that had outlived its creators. All of these theories contained elements of truth, but none captured the full complexity of Robert House's situation. The tribal observers could see the effects of his presence without understanding their cause. They witnessed the city's preservation without recognizing the price that preservation had required. They experienced the Securitron's limitations without realizing those limitations were temporary rather than permanent. Meanwhile, larger political forces were developing across the former United States that would eventually reshape the entire region. The new California Republic had emerged from the chaos of post-war California as the most successful attempt to restore democratic governance in the Wasteland. Founded in 2189, when the communities of Shady Sands, Hub, and Junktown agreed to mutual cooperation. The NCR represented hope for millions of survivors who dreamed of returning to something resembling pre-war civilization. But the NCR's success came with its own complications. Democratic governance required extensive bureaucratic infrastructure that was expensive to maintain and slow to respond to crises. The Republic's commitment to individual rights and due process made it difficult to deal with the kind of immediate threats that were common in the Wasteland. Most problematically, the NCR's territorial expansion was creating conflicts with groups that preferred their independence to the benefits of law. Republican citizenship. The Republic's eastward expansion was driven by both idealistic and practical considerations. NCR leaders genuinely believed that democratic governance was superior to the various forms of tribalism and authoritarianism that dominated most of the Wasteland. But they also recognized that territorial expansion was necessary for economic growth and resource security. The Mojave Desert contained uranium deposits, water resources, and strategic positions that would be valuable for any nation hoping to establish long-term stability. NCR Scouts had been filing reports about Las Vegas since the early 2200s, but these reports were often contradictory and difficult to verify. Some described a thriving city with advanced technology and formidable defenses. Others suggested that Las Vegas was actually abandoned, with its apparent activity being nothing more than automated systems running without human oversight. Planners struggled to develop strategies for an objective they couldn't properly assess. From the opposite direction, a very different kind of expansion was taking place. Edward Sallow's transformation into Caesar had begun in 2246, when he was captured by the Blackfoot tribe during a follower of the Apocalypse expedition to study tribal languages. Instead of being killed, Sallow had impressed his captors with his knowledge and intelligence. He used classical history and military tactics to help the Blackfoot defeat their enemies, gradually positioning himself as their leader and eventual dictator. Caesar's legion represented a radical rejection of both pre-war American values and post-war attempts to recreate them. Instead of democracy, Caesar advocated autocracy. Instead of individual rights, he emphasized collective discipline. Instead of technological dependence, he promoted military prowess and personal strength. The legion's expansion was driven by Caesar's belief that only total conquest could create the kind of stability necessary for long-term civilization. The legion's military doctrine was based on Roman models adapted for post-war conditions. Caesar had studied classical history extensively during his time with the followers, and he understood that Rome's success had been based on its ability to absorb useful elements from conquered cultures while imposing its own governmental structure. The legion recruited heavily from tribal populations, offering them a choice between assimilation and destruction. This approach proved remarkably effective in the anarchic conditions of the post-war world. Tribal groups that had spent decades fighting each other over resources and territory found themselves united under Caesar's banner. The legion's military discipline and strategic coordination gave it significant advantages over more loosely organized opponents. By the 2270s, Caesar controlled territory from the Colorado River to the Great Salt Lake, with expansion continuing in all directions. The collision course between the NCR and Caesar's legion had been apparent to strategic thinkers in both organizations for years before it actually occurred. The Colorado River represented a natural boundary between their spheres of influence, but both sides recognized that the boundary was temporary. The NCR's democratic ideals were incompatible with the legion's authoritarian practices. Caesar's expansionist ambitions couldn't be satisfied while a large, well-organized republic controlled most of California. Las Vegas occupied the most strategically important position along this potential battlefront. Control of the city would provide access to Hoover Dam, one of the few remaining sources of large-scale electrical power in the western United States. The dam's electricity could power industrial operations, military facilities, and civilian infrastructure on a scale that was impossible using smaller power sources. Whoever controlled Hoover Dam would have significant advantages in any long-term conflict. Las Vegas itself remained an unknown factor in these strategic calculations. Both the NCR and Caesar's Legion had intelligence reports about the city, but neither side understood the true nature of its defenses or the intentions of its apparent rulers. The Securitrons were obviously formidable, but their numbers and capabilities were unclear. The city's leadership was completely mysterious, with no known diplomatic contacts or public statements of policy. This uncertainty created opportunities for smaller players to influence events far beyond what their size would normally allow. The tribal groups around Las Vegas found themselves courted by both major factions, each hoping to gain local allies who might provide intelligence about the mysterious city. Caravan companies discovered they could charge premium rates for transportation through the Mojave, since both the NCR and Legion needed regular supply lines to maintain their forward positions. Robert, House remained unconscious through all of awe. These developments, his damaged systems unable to process the complex political situation developing around his city. His monitoring equipment collected fragments of information about tribal movements and distant political developments. But his compromised consciousness couldn't integrate this data into coherent strategic assessments. House's great intellect, which had once predicted the nuclear war years before it occurred, was now reduced to processing random sensory inputs that meant nothing without proper context. The year 2138 marked a turning point that would reshape the political landscape of the Mojave Desert for generations to come. Deep within the Lucky 38, Robert House's damaged life support systems finally achieved the delicate equilibrium necessary to restore his consciousness without killing him. The process was gradual, like emerging from the deepest sleep imaginable, with fragments of awareness slowly coalescing into coherent thought. House's first conscious perception in over 60 years was pain. Not physical pain, which is cybernetic. Life support systems had eliminated, but the psychological agony of realizing how completely his perfect plan had failed. His monitoring systems provided a cascade of diagnostic information that painted a devastating picture of technological decay and missed opportunities. The platinum chip remained undelivered. His Securitron army operated with primitive programming. Most critically, the world had continued evolving without his guidance, creating political situations he hadn't anticipated. The initial weeks of House's reawakening were consumed by a methodical assessment of his city's condition. Las Vegas had survived, which was no small achievement, but survival and success were entirely different concepts. The automated systems had maintained basic infrastructure, but they had also prevented the kind of adaptation that would have allowed the city to thrive in post-war conditions. House discovered that his technological paradise had become a beautiful prison that protected nothing of real value. House's Securitron network provided his primary window into the transformed world beyond his bunker. The robot's basic programming included reconnaissance capabilities, though their limited artificial intelligence meant they could only report what they observed without analyzing its significance. Through their sensors, House began to understand the complex tribal society that had developed around his city during his decades of unconsciousness. The three major tribal groups presented both opportunities and challenges that House's pre-war strategic thinking had anticipated. These weren't the primitive savages that his corporate mindset had expected to find in a post-apocalyptic world. Instead, House discovered sophisticated communities with their own technologies, social structures, and political ambitions, had adapted to wasteland conditions while maintaining many characteristics of advanced civilization. House's analytical mind immediately began calculating how these tribal groups could serve his long-term objectives. The future chairman possessed organizational skills and technical knowledge that could accelerate Las Vegas's reconstruction. The Proto-Kings had developed cultural innovations that could help maintain civilian morale during difficult transitions. The White Glove Society's commitment to refinement suggested they might be natural allies for someone of House's sophisticated tastes. But House also recognized that dealing with these groups would require diplomatic skills he had never needed. During his pre-war business career, corporate negotiations involved parties who shared basic assumptions about profit, efficiency, and rational decision-making. Tribal diplomacy would require understanding motivations, cultural values, and social dynamics that were completely foreign to his experience. House's first attempts at contact were cautious and indirect. He modified his Securitron's programming to allow limited communication with tribal representatives. Though he remained hidden within the Lucky 38, the robots could now deliver simple messages and receive basic responses, creating a rudimentary diplomatic channel that protected House's identity while allowing for preliminary negotiations at the tribal leaders. Reactions to these initial contacts revealed the complexity of the situation House now faced. Some welcomed any opportunity to establish relations with Las Vegas, recognizing that access to the city's resources could benefit their communities significantly. Others suspected that the mysterious messages were attempts at manipulation or control, preferring independence to potentially dangerous alliances. The most sophisticated tribal thinkers understood that whoever controlled Las Vegas possessed power that could reshape the entire region. House's negotiation strategy evolved through trial and error as he learned to navigate tribal political dynamics. His corporate experience had taught him to identify decision-makers and present proposals in terms of quantifiable benefits. But tribal societies operated according to different principles, with consensus building, cultural compatibility, and long-term relationship development taking precedence over immediate material advantages. The process was frustratingly slow for someone accustomed to the rapid decision-making of pre-war business environments. Tribal leaders needed time to consult with their communities, shamans, and traditional advisors. Proposals that seemed obviously beneficial to House were rejected for reasons he found incomprehensible. Simple agreements required extensive ceremonies and rituals that served no apparent practical purpose. But House gradually began to appreciate the sophistication underlying these apparently primitive practices. Tribal decision-making processes were designed to ensure community buy-in for major changes, reducing the likelihood of internal conflict that could destroy fragile post-war societies. The emphasis on consensus and consultation meant that agreements, once reached, were more likely to be honored over long periods. The rituals and ceremonies served important psychological functions, helping communities adapt to new circumstances while maintaining their cultural identities. House's most significant breakthrough came when he realized that the tribal groups were not obstacles to his vision of Las Vegas's renewal, but rather the essential human resources necessary for its implementation. His pre-war plan had assumed that post-war reconstruction could be accomplished primarily through technological means with minimal human involvement. The reality was that advanced technology required skilled operators, creative problem solvers, and social structures capable of supporting complex economic activity. The transformation of the three tribes into casino-operating families represented House's masterstroke of post-war diplomacy. Rather than attempting to impose pre-war business models on post-war communities, House would adapt casino operations to accommodate tribal social structures. Each group would maintain its cultural identity while taking on specialized roles in Las Vegas's economy. The arrangement would benefit everyone involved while serving House's ultimate objectives. But this transformation process would require years of careful planning and gradual implementation. House couldn't simply announce his intentions and expect immediate compliance. He needed to demonstrate his value as an ally while slowly integrating tribal communities into his broader strategic framework. This meant providing immediate benefits like medical care, technical training, and security assistance while working toward longer-term objectives. House's reemergence coincided with increasingly frequent reports of large-scale political developments beyond the Mojave Desert. His intelligence-gathering capabilities were still limited by his damaged monitoring systems, but he could detect signs of major military movements and territorial expansion that suggested the formation of nation-sized political entities. Implications were ominous for someone hoping to maintain the independence of a single city-state. The new California Republic's eastward expansion was proceeding with the methodical thoroughness that characterized democratic institutions at their best. NCR survey teams were mapping potential trade routes, assessing resource availability, and establishing diplomatic contacts with local communities. Their approach was professional and generally peaceful, but it was also clearly intended to prepare for eventual territorial annexation. House recognized that the NCR represented both his greatest opportunity and his most serious threat. The Republic's democratic ideals and technological capabilities made it a natural ally for someone of his progressive political views. But its expansionist tendencies and bureaucratic inefficiencies were incompatible with his vision of Las Vegas as an independent center of innovation and progress. House would need to find ways to benefit from NCR resources without submitting to NCR governance. Caesar's Legion presented a very different set of challenges and opportunities. The Legion's authoritarian structure and military efficiency were aspects House could respect, even if he found their rejection of technology philosophically troubling. More importantly, Caesar's expansion toward the Colorado River was creating the possibility of a direct military confrontation with the NCR that could benefit Las Vegas. Regardless of which side ultimately prevailed, House began developing contingency plans for multiple scenarios involving these two major powers. If the NCR and Legion went to war, Las Vegas could potentially maintain neutrality while profiting from both sides' need for supplies, intelligence, and strategic positions. If one faction achieved decisive victory, Las Vegas would need defensive capabilities sufficient to maintain independence against a unified regional power. If both factions exhausted themselves through prolonged conflict, Las Vegas might be able to emerge as a third alternative that offered superior governance to war-weary populations. All of these scenarios required House to develop capabilities he currently lacked. His Securitron army needed the platinum chip upgrade to become militarily effective against modern opponents. His tribal allies needed training and equipment to function as reliable partners rather than potential liabilities. Most importantly, House himself needed to develop the kind of political and diplomatic skills that his pre-war business career had never required. The gradual awakening of Robert House marked the beginning of a new phase in Las Vegas's post-war history. The city would no longer exist in static isolation, protected by automated systems that couldn't adapt to changing circumstances. Instead, it would become an active participant in the complex political struggles that would determine the future of the American Southwest. House had survived the nuclear apocalypse and decades of technological coma, but his greatest challenges still lay ahead. The question that would define the next phase of House's existence was whether his pre-war genius could adapt to post-war realities quickly enough to achieve his ambitious objectives. The world had continued evolving during his absence, creating opportunities and threats that his original calculations hadn't anticipated. Success would require not just technological superiority and strategic planning, but also human understanding and political wisdom that House had never needed to develop. The intelligence reports that reached House in late 2270 painted a picture that transformed his entire strategic understanding of the Mojave's future. Through a network of informants, intercepted communications, and careful analysis of military movements, House had discovered something that would reshape every calculation he had made about Las Vegas's survival. The new California Republic and Caesar's Legion weren't simply expanding toward each other in some distant, theoretical confrontation. They were on an inevitable collision course that would transform the Colorado River into the most contested strategic boundary in the post-war world. House's analytical mind processed the implications with the same mathematical precision that had made him a pre-war industrial giant. Both factions needed Hoover Dam, not just for its symbolic value as a pre-war engineering marvel, but for the massive electrical output that could power entire civilizations. The NCR's democratic society required industrial infrastructure that was impossible without reliable electricity. Caesar's Legion, despite its rejection of most technology, understood that controlling such a significant resource would provide overwhelming advantages against any opponent. But Hoover Dam was more than just a power source. It was the key to controlling water distribution throughout the entire region. The Colorado River's flow could determine which communities thrived and which withered away in the desert heat. Agricultural development, industrial production, and basic human survival all depended on access to water resources that the dam could regulate with mechanical precision. Whoever controlled Hoover Dam would effectively control the economic foundation of the American Southwest. House realized that his comfortable assumption about Las Vegas's neutrality was nothing more than wishful thinking. The city sat directly between the two largest power blocks in the post-war world, occupying territory that both sides would consider essential for their long-term security. There could be no neutral ground in a conflict of this magnitude. Las Vegas would either become a strategic asset for one of the major factions, or it would be destroyed as a potential threat to whichever side achieved dominance. This revelation forced House to confront the limitations of his current capabilities with brutal honesty. His Securitron army, operating on basic programming without the Platinum chip upgrade, might be sufficient for crowd control and basic security operations. But they were no match for the professional military forces that both the NCR and Legion could deploy. The tribal allies he had been cultivating possessed valuable skills and local knowledge, but they lacked the training and equipment necessary for large-scale warfare against organized armies. Most troubling of all, House recognized that his decades of isolation had left him unprepared for the kind of complex political maneuvering that this situation would require. Corporate negotiations involved parties who shared basic assumptions about rational decision-making and mutual benefit. Military diplomacy required understanding honor codes, territorial ambitions, and ideological commitments that could override purely practical considerations. House would need to learn entirely new skills while operating under time pressure that left no margin for error. The transformation of the three tribal groups into casino families took on new urgency as House began to understand the true scope of the challenges ahead. These communities weren't just potential economic partners anymore. They were essential military allies whose loyalty and capabilities could determine Las Vegas's survival. House needed to accelerate their integration into his strategic framework while ensuring that they remained committed to his vision of independent prosperity rather than submitting to outside pressure. The group that would become the chairman possessed organizational skills that made them natural candidates for managing Las Vegas's complex logistical requirements. Their experience with large-scale scavenging operations had taught them to coordinate multiple teams working toward common objectives. But House recognized that their pragmatic approach to problem-solving might make them susceptible to NCR recruitment efforts, particularly if the Republic could offer them access to advanced technology and stable trade relationships. The future. Kings presented different opportunities and risks. Their cultural innovations and charismatic leadership made them effective at maintaining morale and community cohesion under difficult circumstances. But their emphasis on individual expression and artistic freedom might conflict with the kind of disciplined cooperation that military emergencies would require. House needed to find ways to channel their creative energy towards strategic objectives without destroying the cultural identity that made them valuable allies. The white glove, society's commitment to sophistication and refinement, aligned most closely with House's own values, making them natural partners for his vision of Las Vegas as a center of civilized progress. Their medical expertise and educational achievements demonstrated the kind of intellectual capabilities that advanced technological societies required. But their relatively small numbers and focus on cultural preservation might limit their effectiveness in direct military confrontations. House's strategy for tribal transformation required delicate balance between respecting existing social structures and implementing changes necessary for survival. He couldn't simply impose pre-war business models on post-war communities, but he also couldn't allow tribal traditions to prevent essential adaptations. The process would require years of patient negotiation, gradual integration, and careful management of competing interests within each community. The casino concept provided an elegant solution to many of these challenges. Each tribal group could maintain its cultural identity while taking on specialized roles in Las Vegas's economy. The chairman would handle logistics, supply chain management, and resource allocation. The kings would manage entertainment, public relations, and civilian morale. The White Glove Society would oversee hospitality, medical services, and educational programs. Everyone would benefit from the arrangement while contributing to Las Vegas's overall strategic capabilities. But House understood that economic integration was only the first step in a much larger transformation. The tribal groups needed military training, advanced equipment, and strategic coordination that would allow them to function as effective allies in any conflict with external powers. This meant developing new educational programs, establishing weapons manufacturing capabilities, and creating command structures that could coordinate complex operations across multiple communities. The moral implications of these preparations weighed heavily on House's consciousness as he contemplated the human cost of his strategic decisions. The tribal communities had survived the post-war period by adapting to harsh conditions while maintaining their cultural values and social structures. House's plans would require them to abandon many traditional practices in favor of militarized efficiency that might destroy what made their communities worth preserving. House found himself grappling with questions that his pre-war business experience had never forced him to confront. Did he have the right to transform entire societies to serve his strategic objectives? Were the benefits of technological progress and economic prosperity worth the cultural disruption his plans would inevitably cause? Could he maintain his commitment to human advancement while manipulating people who trusted him with their community's futures? These philosophical concerns were complicated by practical considerations that demanded immediate attention. Intelligence reports indicated that both the NCR and Caesar's Legion were accelerating their eastward and westward expansion respectively. Military units were being repositioned closer to the Colorado River. Diplomatic missions were establishing contact with tribal groups throughout the Mojave. The window for independent action was closing rapidly as the major powers prepared for their inevitable confrontation. House realized that he needed to make fundamental decisions about Las Vegas's future while operating with incomplete information about his opponent's capabilities and intentions. The NCR's democratic institutions made their decision-making processes somewhat predictable, but their military capabilities remained unclear. Caesar's Legion operated with authoritarian efficiency, but their technological limitations and internal stability were unknown factors. Both sides possessed advantages and vulnerabilities that could determine the outcome of any conflict. The strategic situation was further complicated by the presence of smaller factions and independent communities throughout the Mojave. The Brotherhood of Steel maintained hidden bunkers with advanced technology but limited manpower. Various raider groups controlled territory and resources that could prove strategically significant. Merchant organizations possessed intelligence networks and transportation capabilities that both major factions would find valuable. House needed to account for all these variables while developing plans that could adapt to rapidly changing circumstances. As House contemplated the magnitude of the challenges ahead, he experienced something that his mathematical mind found deeply unsettling. For the first time in his adult life, he wasn't certain that superior intellect and careful planning would be sufficient to achieve his objectives. The political forces converging on the Mojave were larger and more complex than anything he had encountered during his pre-war career. Success would require not just strategic brilliance, but also luck, timing, and human cooperation that couldn't be calculated or guaranteed. The revelation that would define the next phase of House's existence wasn't just about military strategy or economic planning. It was the recognition that his vision of technological progress and rational governance would be meaningless if he couldn't find ways to inspire genuine loyalty and commitment from the people whose lives would be shaped by his decisions. House had spent his career treating human beings as variables in complex equations, but the approaching conflict would require him to understand them as partners, allies, and ultimately the only hope for achieving the future he had spent centuries trying to create. The First Battle of Hoover Dam erupted on September 18, 2277, with a ferocity that surprised even the most pessimistic military analysts on both sides. House watched from his sanctuary within the Lucky 38 as two of the most powerful post-war civilizations clashed over control of the Colorado River's most strategic crossing point. His monitoring systems provided fragmentary coverage of the battle, but what he could observe confirmed his worst fears about the scale of violence that modern military forces could unleash when their fundamental interests collided. Caesar's legion had approached the dam with characteristic tactical brilliance and brutal efficiency. Their scouts had identified weak points in the NCR's defensive perimeter weeks before the actual assault began. Legion engineers had constructed crossing points up and down the river to prevent the Republic from concentrating all their forces at the dam itself. Most impressively, Caesar's military commanders had developed strategies that maximized their troops' strengths while minimizing the advantages that NCR technology should have provided. The battle raged for 3 days with an intensity that reminded House of the corporate warfare he had witnessed during his pre-war business career, except that this conflict was being fought with military weapons rather than financial instruments. Both sides committed their elite units to what they recognized as a decisive engagement. The NCR deployed veteran rangers whose marksmanship and tactical skills had been proven in countless smaller conflicts. Caesar's legion sent their Praetorian Guard, fanatically loyal warriors whose training emphasized close combat and psychological warfare. House observed the fighting with the detached fascination of someone who understood that the outcome would determine his own fate, yet remained powerless to influence events directly. His Securitrons maintained their perimeter around Las Vegas, but they were programmed for defensive operations rather than offensive intervention. The tribal communities that would eventually become his casino families were taking shelter in these secure locations, waiting to see which faction would emerge victorious before making commitments that could prove fatal. The NCR's eventual victory came at enormous cost to both sides. Republic casualties numbered in the thousands, including many experienced officers whose loss would weaken the military for years to come. The Legion's retreat was orderly and strategic rather than a panicked rout, suggesting that Caesar's forces had accomplished more of their objectives than the official casualty reports indicated. Most troubling for House's long-term planning, both factions had demonstrated military capabilities that far exceeded his earlier estimates. The battle's aftermath revealed strategic dynamics that House found deeply concerning for Las Vegas's future independence. The NCR's victory established their presence east of the Colorado River for the first time, creating a permanent foothold in territory that Caesar had considered safely within his sphere of influence. But the Republic's losses were severe enough that they couldn't immediately exploit their advantage through aggressive expansion. Instead, they focused on consolidating their hold on Hoover Dam while rebuilding their military strength. Legion's retreat proved to be a masterpiece of strategic withdrawal rather than a simple defeat. Legion forces had inflicted tremendous casualties on the NCR while gathering valuable intelligence about Republic military capabilities and tactical doctrines. More importantly, the Legion had demonstrated that they could engage the NCR's professional military on equal terms, proving to potential allies throughout the region that Caesar's expansion was far from finished. House realized that the First Battle of Hoover Dam had fundamentally altered the strategic balance in the Mojave without resolving the underlying conflict between the two major factions. The NCR now controlled the dam's electrical output, providing them with industrial advantages. That would strengthen their position over time. But Caesar's legion remained a formidable military force with territorial ambitions that couldn't be satisfied through peaceful coexistence with a democratic republic. The implications for Las Vegas were ominous, regardless of which faction had achieved victory. An NCR triumph might have resulted in immediate annexation demands backed by military force flushed with recent success. Caesar's legion victory could have led to siege tactics designed to starve the city into submission. The actual outcome created a different but equally dangerous situation, where both factions would be seeking allies and strategic advantages for the inevitable second battle. House's intelligence networks began detecting signs of renewed military preparations within months of the first battle's conclusion. The NCR was establishing permanent military installations throughout their new territory, while negotiating agreements with local communities that provided logistical support and intelligence-gathering capabilities. Caesar's legion was conducting extensive training exercises that suggested they were developing new tactical approaches, specifically designed to counter the strategies that had failed during their first assault on the dam. Both factions were also intensifying their recruitment efforts among the Mojave's various communities and tribal groups. NCR diplomatic missions offered trade agreements, technological assistance, and protection from raiders in exchange for political alliance and military cooperation. Legion recruiters promised order, security, and inclusion in Caesar's expanding empire for groups that demonstrated loyalty and military potential. The pressure on neutral communities to choose sides was becoming irresistible. House understood that his window for independent action was closing rapidly as the political situation polarized around the two major factions. The tribal communities he had been cultivating were receiving offers from both the NCR and Legion that would provide immediate benefits without requiring the long-term commitment that his casino transformation plans demanded. Some tribal leaders were beginning to question whether House's promises of future prosperity were worth the risks of maintaining neutrality in an increasingly dangerous region. The mysterious nature of House's leadership was becoming a strategic liability as other factions demanded clear commitments from potential allies. NCR officials wanted to negotiate directly with Las Vegas's government, but House remained hidden within the Lucky 38, communicating only through Securitron intermediaries. Caesar's legion respected strength and decisive leadership, but they couldn't assess House's capabilities without face-to-face meetings that his life support requirements made impossible. House began developing contingency plans for multiple scenarios that might emerge from the growing tensions between the major factions. If the NCR and Legion exhausted themselves through prolonged warfare, Las Vegas might be able to emerge as a third alternative that offered superior governance to war-weary populations. If one faction achieved decisive victory, House would need defensive capabilities sufficient to maintain independence against a unified regional power. If both sides sought to partition the Mojave between them, Las Vegas would need to demonstrate enough military strength to be included in negotiations as an equal partner rather than a conquest target. All of these scenarios required House to develop capabilities he currently lacked while maintaining the secrecy that protected him from direct threats. His Securitron army needed the platinum chip upgrade to become militarily effective against professional opponents. But the chip remained missing somewhere in the Wasteland. His tribal allies needed advanced training and equipment to function as reliable military partners, but such preparations would reveal his strategic intentions to intelligence networks operated by both major factions. Most critically, House needed to establish his personal credibility as a leader worthy of respect and fear without exposing the vulnerabilities that his life support requirements created. The political dynamics of post-war warfare required personal relationships, an individual reputation in ways that corporate business had never demanded. House would need to find methods of projecting strength and wisdom while remaining physically isolated from the human interactions that normally establish such qualities. The hidden truth that emerged from the first battle of Hoover Dam was that House's original vision of Las Vegas as an independent city-state was both more achievable and more dangerous than he had originally calculated. The battle had proven that neither major faction possessed overwhelming advantages that would guarantee permanent victory. This created opportunities for smaller players to influence events through superior strategy and tactical precision. But it also meant that the conflict would continue indefinitely, with each side seeking whatever advantages they could gain through alliance, conquest, or elimination of potential threats. House's greatest challenge would be timing his emergence as an active political force to coincide with maximum effectiveness while minimizing vulnerability to premature destruction. He needed to remain hidden until his capabilities were sufficient to demand respect, but he also needed to establish relationships and gather intelligence that required some degree of public visibility. The balance between secrecy and influence would determine whether his centuries of patient preparation would culminate in triumph or disaster. The stage was being set for a second battle that would be even more decisive than the first, with stakes that extended far beyond control of a single dam or river crossing. The future of human civilization in the American Southwest would be determined by whichever faction could best adapt to the changing strategic environment while eliminating or co-opting potential rivals. House's role in that future remained to be written, but the time for passive observation was rapidly coming to an end. The years following the first battle of Hoover Dam transformed House from a passive observer into an active intelligence gatherer, whose network of informants and data collection systems rivaled those of the major factions themselves. The battle had demonstrated that knowledge would be as crucial as military strength in determining the outcome of future conflicts. House understood that his survival depended on developing superior understanding of his opponent's capabilities, weaknesses, and strategic intentions. House's intelligence operations began with systematic analysis of the NCR's governmental structure and decision-making processes. The Republic's democratic institutions created both strengths and vulnerabilities that a careful observer could exploit. Democratic governance required extensive consultation and debate before major policy decisions could be implemented, creating predictable delays that provided advance warning of military and diplomatic initiatives. A democracy also created accountability mechanisms that made NCR officials responsive to public opinion and electoral pressures in ways that could be influenced through careful manipulation of information. The NCR's expansion into the Mojave had created internal political tensions that House found particularly interesting to monitor. California voters were growing weary of expensive military campaigns that provided few immediate benefits to civilian populations, struggling with their own economic challenges. The Republic's senators and representatives were under increasing pressure to justify continued military spending on distant territorial acquisitions while infrastructure problems persisted in established NCR communities. House's analysis revealed that the NCR's apparent strength concealed significant structural weaknesses that could be exploited by opponents who understood the Republic's internal dynamics. The democratic process that legitimized NCR governance also created opportunities for political manipulation through propaganda, economic pressure, and strategic alliance building with influential interest groups. Most importantly, the Republic's commitment to constitutional principles limited the kinds of tactics they could employ against opponents who weren't bound by similar moral constraints. Caesar's Legion presented very different analytical challenges that required House to develop new frameworks for understanding authoritarian political systems. The Legion's hierarchical structure concentrated decision-making authority in Caesar himself, making their strategic planning more rapid and decisive than the NCR's democratic processes. But this concentration of power also created vulnerabilities that didn't exist in more decentralized systems. If Caesar could be eliminated or discredited, the entire legion might collapse into competing factions without effective coordination. Mechanisms. House's intelligence gathering revealed disturbing information about Caesar's personal health and the succession problems that were beginning to develop within the legion's leadership structure. The dictator's medical conditions were being concealed from his followers, but House's monitoring systems could detect subtle changes in Caesar's behavior patterns that suggested declining physical and possibly mental capabilities. The implications for regional stability were enormous, since Caesar's death could trigger civil wars that would reshape the entire political landscape. The legion's military doctrine combined classical Roman tactics with post-war innovations that House found both impressive and troubling. Caesar had studied pre-war military history extensively, adapting ancient strategies to contemporary conditions with remarkable creativity and effectiveness. But the legion's rejection of advanced technology created limitations that became more problematic as they encountered opponents with superior equipment and communication capabilities. House's most valuable intelligence came from careful observation of how both factions interacted with smaller communities and independent groups throughout the Mojave. These interactions revealed each side's true priorities, negotiating styles, and long-term strategic objectives in ways that official propaganda couldn't conceal. The NCR's approach emphasized gradual integration through economic incentives and political alliance building. The Legion preferred rapid assimilation through military conquest followed by cultural transformation according to their ideological principles. The Brotherhood of Steel represented a particularly complex intelligence target that required House to develop entirely new analytical frameworks. This quasi-religious military organization possessed advanced technology that rivaled or exceeded pre-war capabilities. But their isolationist tendencies and internal doctrinal disputes limited their effectiveness as a regional power. House recognized that the Brotherhood could become either valuable allies or dangerous enemies, depending on how their leadership chose to respond to the changing strategic environment. House's intelligence network gradually expanded to include informants within multiple factions and communities throughout the region. These sources provided real-time information about military movements, political developments, and economic conditions that would have been impossible to obtain through purely technological surveillance methods. But managing human intelligence networks required skills that House's corporate background hadn't prepared him for, including psychological manipulation, operational security, and the complex ethics of espionage activities. The tribal communities that would become his casino families proved to be particularly valuable sources of intelligence about regional developments. Their traditional territories placed them in positions to observe both major factions' activities, while their cultural practices included sophisticated information-sharing networks that had evolved over generations of survival in harsh conditions. House learned to tap into these networks while providing benefits that encouraged continued cooperation without creating dependency relationships that could be exploited by his opponents. House's analysis of regional economic patterns revealed strategic opportunities that neither major faction had fully recognized. The post-war economy was largely based on scavenging, agriculture, and small-scale manufacturing, but there were significant untapped resources that could support much larger populations if properly developed. Water management, energy production, and transportation infrastructure were the key limiting factors that determined which communities could grow and prosper versus those that remained marginal settlements. The platinum chip's continued absence remained House's most serious intelligence challenge and strategic vulnerability. His monitoring systems could detect no trace of the device, despite extensive surveillance of known courier routes, raider camps, and scavenging operations throughout the region. The chip might have been destroyed during the chaos following the Great War, but House's calculations suggested it was more likely that someone had acquired it without understanding its significance. The possibility that his ultimate weapon was sitting in some forgotten storage room or private collection was both frustrating and terrifying. House's intelligence gathering revealed that both major factions were aware of Las Vegas's unusual status and were developing strategies for dealing with the city's mysterious leadership. NCR analysts had concluded that Las Vegas was controlled by either a pre-war artificial intelligence or a secretive organization with access to advanced technology. Caesar's Legion had reached similar conclusions, but was more focused on assessing the city's military capabilities than understanding its political structure. Neither faction had accurately identified House as the individual responsible for Las Vegas's preservation and current policies. This misunderstanding provided House with significant advantages, since both the NCR and Legion were preparing to negotiate with entities they didn't properly understand. But it also created risks, since their strategic planning might be based on incorrect assumptions that could lead to dangerous miscalculations when direct confrontations became unavoidable. House's growing understanding of regional political dynamics led him to develop increasingly sophisticated strategies for managing the complex relationships between different factions and communities. Rather than simply choosing sides in the NCR Legion conflict, House began exploring possibilities for creating alternative political arrangements that could serve his long-term objectives while providing stability for the region's population. The concept of an independent New Vegas began to crystallize as House contemplated the various scenarios that might emerge from future conflicts. Las Vegas possessed unique advantages that neither major faction could easily replicate, including advanced technology, strategic location, and economic resources that were essential for regional prosperity. But independence would require military capabilities sufficient to deter aggression while maintaining diplomatic relationships that prevented isolation and siege tactics. House's vision extended beyond simple survival toward active leadership in shaping the post-war world according to principles of rational governance and technological progress. The intelligence he had gathered revealed that both major factions possessed serious flaws that limited their potential for creating lasting stability and prosperity. The NCR's democratic processes were too slow and inefficient for dealing with post-war challenges. Caesar's Legion's authoritarian structure was too rigid and brutal for maintaining popular support over extended periods. Las Vegas could potentially offer a third alternative that combined the best features of both systems while avoiding their most serious weaknesses. House's technological capabilities could provide the efficiency and decisiveness that democracy often lacked. His commitment to rational governance could create the legitimacy and popular support that authoritarianism couldn't sustain. But achieving this vision would require House to emerge from his hidden sanctuary and assume direct leadership of the political forces that would determine the Mojave's future. The year 2281 arrived with an atmosphere of barely contained tension that permeated every corner of the Mojave Desert. House's intelligence networks had been detecting increased military activity from both major factions for months, but the patterns suggested something more significant than routine border skirmishes or supply operations. Both the NCR and Caesar's Legion were positioning assets and personnel in ways that indicated preparation for a major offensive operation. The Second Battle of Hoover Dam was approaching, and this time the outcome would determine not just regional control, but the fundamental nature of post-war civilization in the American Southwest. House understood that his window for influencing events was rapidly closing. His years of careful preparation, intelligence gathering, and strategic planning would be meaningless if he couldn't find a way to insert Las Vegas into the conflict as an independent force capable of achieving decisive results. The tribal communities had been successfully transformed into casino operating families, but they still lacked the advanced military capabilities that would be necessary for survival against professional armies. Most critically, the platinum chip remained missing, leaving House's Securitron army operating with primitive programming that was inadequate for the sophisticated warfare that lay ahead. The decision to hire Courier Six represented House's most desperate gamble and his greatest hope for salvaging victory from what appeared to be an impossible strategic situation. The courier service that had failed him so catastrophically in 2077 had evolved into a network of independent operators who specialized in high-risk deliveries through dangerous territory. House's analysis of available personnel had identified a courier whose track record suggested reliability, resourcefulness, and most importantly, the kind of moral flexibility that might be necessary for handling morally ambiguous assignments. House's instructions to the courier were deliberately vague, revealing only what was necessary to ensure successful completion of the primary mission. The package was described as valuable corporate property that needed to be delivered to the Lucky 38 for a substantial payment upon completion. The courier wasn't informed about the chip's true capabilities or its significance for regional power balance. House calculated that ignorance would provide better operational security than trust. Since the courier couldn't reveal information they didn't possess if captured or interrogated by hostile forces, the platinum chip's recovery location had been identified through a combination of intelligence analysis and systematic investigation of every lead House's networks could develop. The chip had apparently been acquired by a Brotherhood of Steel unit during the immediate aftermath of the Great War, then lost again when that unit was destroyed by super mutants in the early 2100s. From there, the chip had passed through various hands before ending up in a private collection in the hub, where its significance remained unrecognized for decades. House's acquisition of the chip required careful negotiation through multiple intermediaries to avoid revealing his identity or location to potential enemies. The transaction was structured as a routine purchase of pre-war technology by a private collector, with payment routed through shell companies that House had established for exactly such purposes. The seller never realized that they had just provided the key to regional military dominance to someone who possessed the infrastructure necessary to utilize its capabilities. The courier's journey from the hub to New Vegas would normally have been a routine operation lasting no more than a few days. The route was well established, with regular caravan traffic and known safe stopping points along the way. But House's intelligence networks had detected unusual activity along several possible paths, including increased raider presence, mysterious strangers asking questions about courier schedules, and military units from multiple factions conducting operations in areas they normally avoided. House realized that his enemies had somehow learned about the chip's significance and were actively working to prevent its delivery to Las Vegas. The Brotherhood of Steel might have retained records about the chip's capabilities from their brief period of possession. Caesar's Legion could have interrogated captured NCR personnel who possessed classified information about RobCo technology. The NCR's own intelligence services might have identified House's purchasing activities and drawn correct conclusions about his strategic intentions. The implications were terrifying for House's long-term survival prospects. If hostile factions understood the chip's importance, they would spare no effort to acquire or destroy it rather than allowing House to upgrade his military capabilities. The courier was walking into a trap that House couldn't warn them about without revealing information that might compromise other aspects of his strategic planning. Success would require the courier to overcome challenges that House himself couldn't fully anticipate or prepare for. House's contingency planning for Courier failure involved scenarios that he found deeply disturbing to contemplate. Without the platinum chip, his Securitron army would remain limited to basic defensive operations that might not be sufficient to protect Las Vegas during the approaching battle. His casino families would face professional military forces without the robotic support that their transformation had been designed to complement. Most critically, House himself would remain vulnerable to direct assault if enemies could penetrate his outer defenses and reach the lucky 38's lower levels. The tribal communities that had become the Chairman, Kings, and White Glove Society were approaching the final stages of their transformation into casino operators. But the process was revealing unexpected complications that House hadn't anticipated. Each group was adapting to their new roles in ways that reflected their cultural values and traditional practices, creating hybrid institutions that were neither fully tribal nor completely commercial. The results were often innovative and effective, but they also created management challenges that House's corporate experience hadn't prepared him for. The chairman's approach to casino operations emphasized efficiency and customer service in ways that reflected their experience with large-scale logistics and resource management. Their gambling operations were profitable and well-organized, but they also maintained traditional decision-making processes that required extensive consultation before implementing policy changes. This democratic approach created delays that House found frustrating, but it also generated employee loyalty and customer satisfaction that more authoritarian management styles couldn't achieve. The Kings had transformed casino entertainment into something that combined traditional Nevada gaming with post-war musical culture in ways that attracted visitors from throughout the region. Their performances were drawing audiences who came to Las Vegas specifically for cultural experiences that couldn't be found elsewhere in the Wasteland. But their emphasis on artistic expression sometimes conflicted with the commercial requirements of profitable casino operations, creating tensions that required careful management to resolve. The White Glove Society's casino had become the most sophisticated dining and hospitality establishment in the post-war world, offering luxury experiences that rivaled the best pre-war establishments. Their commitment to culinary excellence and refined service attracted wealthy customers who were willing to pay premium prices for genuine sophistication in an otherwise crude world. But their high standards created operational costs that made their casino less profitable than the other operations, raising questions about long-term financial sustainability. House's personal preparation for direct leadership involvement required him to confront physical and psychological challenges that his life support systems couldn't entirely overcome. Decades of isolation had atrophied social skills that would be essential for managing complex relationships with allies, enemies, and neutral parties during the approaching crisis. His communication would need to be conducted through technological intermediaries that might create barriers to the kind of personal connection that effective leadership often required. The Lucky 38's defensive systems had been upgraded and tested extensively, but House understood that no fortification was impregnable against determined attackers with sufficient resources and time. His survival strategy relied on creating situations where enemies would find it more beneficial to negotiate than to attempt direct assault. This required projecting strength while maintaining flexibility, demonstrating resolve while preserving options for compromise when circumstances demanded tactical retreats. House's analysis of the approaching battle had identified several possible outcomes that could serve his strategic objectives, but all of them required precise timing and flawless execution of complex plans that depended on variables he couldn't completely control. The Courier's success or failure would determine whether House could participate in the battle as an equal partner or would be forced to remain a passive observer whose fate would be determined by others. The weight of centuries of planning and preparation was converging on decisions that would be made in the next few days by people whose loyalty, competence, and luck remained unknown quantities in House's calculations. For perhaps the first time since his pre-war business career, Robert House was genuinely uncertain about his ability to control events that would determine not just his personal survival, but the future of human civilization in the region he had spent so much effort trying to preserve and improve. The moment Courier 6 entered the Lucky 38's elevator and began the descent to House's private chambers marked the culmination of over 2 centuries of planning, preparation, and patient waiting. House had imagined this meeting countless times during his decades of isolation, but the reality of direct human contact, after so many years, proved more emotionally overwhelming than his analytical mind had anticipated. Here was someone who had succeeded where so many others had failed, delivering the key to House's ultimate strategic vision, despite obstacles that should have made success impossible. The courier's journey to reach this moment had been far more harrowing than House had originally calculated. Intelligence reports, filtering back through his networks, painted a picture of systematic betrayal, violent confrontation, and miraculous survival that read more like ancient mythology than contemporary military operations. The courier had been ambushed near Good Springs by Benny, the ambitious leader of the chairman, who had recognized the chip's significance and attempted to acquire it for his own purposes. Shot in the head and left for dead, the courier had somehow survived through a combination of medical intervention, personal determination, and what could only be described as extraordinary luck. House's analysis of these events revealed layers of complexity that transformed his understanding of the strategic situation throughout the Mojave. Benny's betrayal wasn't simply personal ambition or random criminal opportunism. The chairman leader had been contacted by agents representing multiple factions, each offering substantial rewards for information about House's activities and capabilities. The attempted theft of the platinum chip represented a convergence of intelligence operations that House's own networks had failed to detect until it was almost too late. The courier's recovery and subsequent actions had created ripple effects throughout the region that were still reshaping political relationships between various factions and communities. The individual who had been intended as House's simple delivery agent had instead become an independent force, whose decisions and alliances could determine the outcome of the approaching battle. This development was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating for someone who had spent his entire adult life believing that superior planning could control most variables in complex situations. House's first direct conversation with the courier provided insights into post-war human psychology that decades of remote observation had failed to reveal. This person had survived experiences that would have destroyed most individuals, yet they remained capable of rational decision-making and strategic thinking under circumstances that would have reduced others to desperate survival instincts. The courier represented something House had begun to doubt still existed in the post-war world. A human being who combined practical competence with moral flexibility in ways that made them capable of navigating complex political situations without being destroyed by them. The revelation of House's true nature and circumstances required careful management to avoid creating the kind of shock or revulsion that might drive the courier toward his enemies. House had to explain his survival through advanced life support technology without revealing the full extent of his physical vulnerability. He needed to demonstrate his strategic capabilities and resources without appearing so powerful that alliance with him seemed unnecessary. Most critically, he had to establish personal credibility and trustworthiness despite communicating through technological intermediaries that prevented normal human interaction. The courier's reactions to these revelations provided House with crucial information about how other individuals might respond to his eventual public emergence as Las Vegas's leader. Some aspects of his story generated admiration for his foresight and determination in preparing for nuclear war. Other elements created concern about his methods and motivations, particularly his willingness to manipulate entire communities to serve his strategic objectives. The Courier's questions and comments revealed assumptions and values that were characteristic of post-war culture, but fundamentally different from pre-war perspectives that still shaped House's worldview. House's presentation of the platinum chip and its significance marked the moment when his centuries of preparation either culminated in triumph or revealed the futility of his entire enterprise. The chip contained quantum encrypted programming that would transform his Securitron army from basic security robots into sophisticated military units capable of coordinated operations against professional opponents. But the upgrade process required the chip to be installed in the Lucky 38's central computer system, creating a window of vulnerability during which House's defenses would be temporarily compromised. The decision to trust the Courier with this critical operation represented the ultimate test of House's ability to assess human character and motivations under pressure. His analytical frameworks could evaluate technical capabilities and strategic resources with mathematical precision, but human loyalty and trustworthiness remained variables that resisted quantitative analysis. The Courier could complete the upgrade as requested, serving House's interests and securing Las Vegas's independence. They could sabotage the process, crippling House's military capabilities at the crucial moment when external threats were approaching. Or they could attempt to seize control of the upgraded army for their own purposes. Replacing House as the dominant power in the region. The revelation that House had been secretly manipulating regional politics for decades created moral complications that the Courier was uniquely positioned to understand and judge. House's actions had preserved Las Vegas and provided stability for thousands of people who might otherwise have perished in the post-war chaos. But his methods had involved deception, manipulation, and the transformation of traditional communities into commercial enterprises that served his strategic objectives. The line between benevolent leadership and exploitative control was often ambiguous in ways that reasonable people could interpret differently. House's ultimate vision extended far beyond the immediate crisis of the Second Battle of Hoover Dam, toward objectives that would reshape human civilization on a scale that hadn't been attempted since before the Great War. The upgraded Securitron army was only the first step in a comprehensive plan for regional development that included infrastructure, reconstruction, technological advancement, and economic expansion that could support populations far larger than current resource limitations allowed. Las Vegas would become the foundation for a new form of human society that combined the efficiency of advanced technology with rational governance that avoided both the inefficiencies of democracy and the brutality of authoritarianism. But House's most ambitious goal remained hidden even from the Courier during their initial meetings. The preservation and development of Earth-based civilization was ultimately a temporary measure designed to provide the resources and infrastructure necessary for humanity's expansion beyond the planet that had proven so vulnerable to catastrophic destruction. House's calculations indicated that Earth's resources were finite and its political dynamics were inherently unstable in ways that made future catastrophic wars inevitable. True long-term security for human civilization required the development of space-based colonies that could survive, even if Earth itself were completely destroyed. The space colonization project represented the culmination of House's pre-war research into advanced propulsion systems, life support technology, and automated manufacturing capabilities that could function independently in extraterrestrial environments. His RobCo Industries had been developing prototypes and conducting feasibility studies for interplanetary expansion since the 2060s, but the Great War had interrupted these efforts before they could be fully implemented. House's post-war activities were designed to recreate the industrial and technological infrastructure necessary for resuming space exploration on a scale that could establish permanent human settlements beyond Earth's atmosphere. The Courier's response to these revelations would determine not just the immediate outcome of the approaching battle, but the long-term trajectory of human development for potentially thousands of years. If House's vision could be implemented successfully, humanity would become a multi-planetary species, capable of surviving catastrophic events that would destroy any single world. If his plans were rejected or sabotaged, human civilization would remain vulnerable to the same kinds of destructive impulses that had already produced one global nuclear war, and could easily produce others. House's emotional state during these conversations combined intellectual excitement with profound vulnerability in ways that he hadn't experienced since his pre-war business career. He was finally able to share his complete strategic vision with another human being who possessed the intelligence and capabilities necessary to understand its implications. But he was also completely dependent on that person's decisions and loyalties for the survival of everything he had worked to achieve. The irony wasn't lost on House that his ultimate triumph or failure would be determined by the moral character and practical judgment of someone whose background and motivations remained largely unknown to him. The climactic revelation of House's true objectives transformed the Courier's mission from a simple delivery assignment into a decision that would shape the future of human civilization. The weight of that responsibility was enormous, but so were the potential rewards for success. House offered partnership in the most ambitious undertaking in human history, along with the resources and authority necessary to implement changes that could benefit millions of people. The alternative was accepting the limitations and conflicts of existing political systems that had already proven their inability to prevent catastrophic warfare and social collapse. As House awaited the Courier's decision, he experienced something that his mathematical mind found deeply unsettling but also strangely liberating. For the first time in over 2 centuries, the outcome of his carefully constructed plans depended entirely on variables he couldn't calculate or control. Human free will, moral judgment, and personal loyalty would determine whether his vision of human progress and expansion would be realized or remain forever trapped in the technological prison he had built to preserve it. The Second Battle of Hoover Dam erupted with a complexity that defied the simple narratives both major factions had constructed about their inevitable confrontation. Unlike the first battle, which had been primarily a contest between 2 organized armies fighting for territorial control, this engagement became a multi-sided conflict involving numerous independent actors whose decisions would determine not just the battle's outcome, but the fundamental power structure of the post-war American Southwest. House's upgraded Securitron army emerged from their hidden positions with capabilities that shocked military observers on all sides. The Platinum chip had transformed basic security robots into sophisticated war machines that could coordinate complex tactical operations while adapting to changing battlefield conditions in real time. Their weapon systems had been upgraded from crowd control devices to military-grade armaments capable of engaging professional soldiers on equal terms. Most importantly, their artificial intelligence had evolved from simple programmed responses to genuine strategic thinking that could outmaneuver human opponents who underestimated robotic capabilities. The sight of House's mechanical army advancing across the Mojave battlefield created psychological effects that proved as important as their direct military impact. NCR troops who had expected to face only Caesar's Legion suddenly found themselves confronting an entirely new type of opponent whose capabilities and intentions remained mysterious. Legion warriors who had prepared for close combat against Republic soldiers discovered that their traditional tactics were ineffective against enemies that felt no fear, required no rest, and could coordinate their movements with mathematical precision. The Courier's role in these events varied dramatically depending on the alliances and decisions they had made during their journey through the Mojave. Some outcomes saw the Courier serving as House's primary agent, using their knowledge of regional politics and personal relationships to coordinate between Las Vegas forces and various allied factions. Other possibilities involved the Courier choosing sides with either the NCR or Caesar's Legion, creating complex triangular conflicts where House's independence was challenged by former allies who had decided his vision was incompatible with their own objectives. The most fascinating scenarios emerged when the Courier chose to pursue their own independent agenda, using their unique position and accumulated resources to challenge all three major factions simultaneously. These outcomes demonstrated the degree to which individual agency could influence large-scale political events in the post-war world, where traditional institutional structures were weak enough that determined individuals could reshape entire regions through strategic action and careful alliance-building. House single quotes S victory in the battle represented validation of strategic principles he had developed over decades of careful planning and patient preparation. Superior technology, rational decision-making, and comprehensive intelligence gathering had proven capable of overcoming opponents with larger armies and more extensive territorial control. The NCR's democratic processes had created the kind of bureaucratic inefficiencies and political constraints that House had predicted would limit their effectiveness in crisis situations. Caesar's Legion's authoritarian structure had generated the kind of rigid thinking and tactical inflexibility that made them vulnerable to opponents who could adapt more rapidly to changing circumstances. But House's triumph came with complications that his original calculations hadn't fully anticipated. Victory in battle was only the first step in a much larger process of establishing lasting political control over territory and populations that had their own interests, values, and survival strategies. The NCR's defeat didn't eliminate their democratic ideals or their support among civilian populations who preferred republican governance to autocratic rule by a mysterious figure operating through robotic intermediaries. Caesar's Legion's military losses didn't destroy their organizational structure or their appeal to communities that valued order and security over individual freedom and technological progress. The integration of the Mojave's various communities into House's vision of independent prosperity required diplomatic skills and cultural sensitivity that his corporate background hadn't prepared him for. The tribal communities that had become his casino families needed to maintain their cultural identities while adapting to new economic roles that served House's strategic objectives. Smaller settlements throughout the region required protection and support that demonstrated the benefits of alliance with Las Vegas without creating dependency relationships that stifled local initiative and self-reliance. House's emergence as a public figure after decades of hidden operations created both opportunities and vulnerabilities that reshaped his relationship with every other political actor in the region. His technological capabilities and strategic resources were now visible to potential enemies, who could develop countermeasures and alliance strategies designed to limit his influence. But his proven ability to achieve decisive victory against major opponents also established his credibility as a leader worthy of respect and fear from groups that might otherwise have dismissed Las Vegas as a marginal player in regional politics. The revelation of House's space colonization objectives created reactions that ranged from enthusiastic support to horrified rejection among the various groups who learned about his ultimate goals. Some communities embraced the vision of humanity's expansion beyond Earth as the logical next step in post-war recovery and development. Others viewed the space program as a dangerous distraction from immediate survival needs and social reconstruction, requirements that should take priority over speculative long-term projects. The most sophisticated political thinkers recognized that House's space ambitions could either unite the post-war world around common objectives or fragment it into competing factions based on fundamentally incompatible visions of human destiny. The economic implications of House's victory extended far beyond the immediate benefits of controlling Hoover Dam's electrical output and the Colorado River's water resources. Las Vegas became the focal point for trade networks that connected California's NCR territories with the Legion's eastern holdings, generating commercial revenues that could fund both immediate reconstruction projects and long-term technological development. The city's casinos and entertainment facilities attracted visitors from throughout the Wasteland, creating cultural exchange opportunities that helped spread House's vision of rational progress and technological advancement. House's relationship with the Courier evolved from simple employment to genuine partnership as both individuals recognized their mutual dependence for achieving objectives that neither could accomplish alone. The Courier's understanding of post-war human psychology and regional political dynamics complemented House's technological capabilities and strategic vision in ways that created synergistic effects neither had anticipated. Their collaboration demonstrated that successful post-war leadership required combining pre-war knowledge and resources with post-war adaptability and social skills. The broader implications of House's success for post-war American civilization remained contested among political theorists and strategic planners throughout the region. House's model of technocratic governance offered efficiency and effectiveness that democratic and authoritarian alternatives had failed to achieve, but it also raised questions about individual freedom, cultural autonomy, and the moral legitimacy of rule by unelected technical experts. The long-term sustainability of House's system would depend on his ability to maintain popular support while implementing policies that served his vision of human progress rather than immediate public preferences. The defeated factions' responses to House's victory created ongoing security challenges that required constant vigilance and adaptive countermeasures. NCR remnants continued advocating for democratic restoration while conducting guerrilla operations designed to undermine Las Vegas's authority over annexed territories. Caesar's Legion fractured into competing successor organizations that maintained military capabilities while developing new ideological frameworks that incorporated lessons learned from their defeat. Neither major faction accepted permanent subordination to House's rule, ensuring that regional politics would remain unstable for years to come. House's legacy began taking shape even before the immediate consequences of his victory had been fully resolved. He had proven that superior individual vision and technological capabilities could overcome larger, but less efficiently organized opponents in post-war conditions. His methods demonstrated both the potential benefits and ethical costs of pursuing long-term objectives through manipulation of people and communities who lacked complete information about his ultimate goals. Most significantly, he had established the precedent that post-war political development didn't need to be limited by pre-war models of governance, opening possibilities for entirely new forms of human organization that could address contemporary challenges while preparing for future opportunities and threats. The resolution of House's story marked not an ending, but a transformation of the questions that would define human civilization's future development. His success had established Las Vegas as a stable foundation for technological advancement and economic growth, but it had also revealed the complex. The neon lights of Las Vegas flickered against the velvet darkness of the desert night, casting their eternal glow across a city that had survived the end of the world and emerged stronger for the experience. From his chambers within the lucky 38, Robert House gazed out at the metropolis he had preserved through centuries of patient planning and calculated risk. The sounds of celebration drifted up from the streets below, where people from across the wasteland had come to witness something unprecedented in the post-war world. A functioning civilization that offered both progress and prosperity without demanding the complete surrender of human dignity or cultural identity. The transformation of Las Vegas from an automated ghost town into a thriving center of commerce and culture had taken years to complete, but the results exceeded even House's optimistic projections. The casino families that had evolved from tribal communities had created something entirely new in the post-war landscape. Entertainment venues that combined traditional Nevada gaming with innovative cultural experiences drawn from their own heritage and the broader Wasteland's emerging artistic traditions. The chairman had developed organizational systems that rivaled pre-war corporate efficiency while maintaining the community solidarity that had enabled their survival in harsh conditions. The Kings had created a musical renaissance that attracted performers and audiences from hundreds of miles away, transforming Las Vegas into a cultural capital that nourished the human spirit alongside material prosperity. The White Glove Society had established standards of sophistication and refinement that proved civilization could flourish even in the aftermath of nuclear devastation. House's relationship with these communities had evolved from manipulation through partnership toward something approaching genuine mutual respect and affection. The process had taught him lessons about human nature that his pre-war corporate experience had never provided. People weren't simply variables in complex equations that could be optimized through superior planning and resource allocation. They were creative, adaptable beings whose contributions to society often exceeded the narrow roles that efficient systems might assign to them. The casino families had improved upon House's original vision by adding elements of cultural richness and social cohesion that his purely technological approach had overlooked. The courier who had made this transformation possible remained a frequent visitor to the Lucky 38, though their role had shifted from employee to advisor and eventually to something resembling friendship. Their journeys throughout the Wasteland continued to provide House with insights into the broader changes that were reshaping post-war America. The NCR territories were slowly adapting to their reduced influence while developing new forms of democratic governance that incorporated lessons learned from their defeat. Caesar's Legion's successor states were experimenting with modified versions of their predecessors' organizational principles, creating more flexible and less brutal forms of authoritarian rule. Independent communities throughout the region were finding ways to balance autonomy with the benefits of trade and cooperation with Las Vegas. House's space colonization project had progressed from visionary speculation to practical engineering. As the resources and infrastructure necessary for serious interplanetary expansion gradually came online, the first automated manufacturing satellites were already in orbit, producing materials and components that couldn't be created efficiently on Earth's surface. Robotic mining operations were extracting resources from asteroid belts that would support human colonies for thousands of years. Most exciting of all, the first experimental habitats were being constructed at Lagrange points, where they could serve as stepping stones for eventual expansion to Mars and the outer planets. The moral questions that had troubled House during his rise to power had found resolution through practical experience rather than theoretical analysis. His methods had indeed involved deception, manipulation, and the transformation of traditional communities into forms that served his strategic objectives. But the results had created opportunities for human flourishing that wouldn't have existed without his intervention. The people of the Mojave enjoyed security, prosperity, and cultural freedom that was unprecedented in the post-war world. Their children were receiving educations that combined practical survival skills with classical knowledge that connected them to humanity's greatest intellectual achievements. House's legacy was already visible in the younger generation that had grown up under his governance. These individuals possessed technological literacy that rivaled pre-war standards, while maintaining the adaptability and resilience that post-war conditions had demanded. They understood both the potential benefits and the serious risks associated with advanced technology, having witnessed both nuclear devastation and the constructive applications of scientific knowledge. Most importantly, they shared House's vision of human expansion beyond Earth as a natural and necessary step in their species' development. The evening air carried the sounds of music from the various casinos, each one reflecting the cultural identity of the family that operated it, while contributing to the broader symphony of human activity that made Las Vegas unique in the Wasteland. Street vendors sold food that combined pre-war recipes with post-war ingredients, creating culinary experiences that were both nostalgic and innovative. Artists displayed works that incorporated scavenged materials into aesthetic expressions that captured both the tragedy of the Great War and the hope of reconstruction. House's own mortality remained a distant but increasingly relevant consideration as he contemplated the long-term implications of his achievements. His life support systems could potentially maintain his existence for decades or even centuries more, but he had begun training successors who could continue his work if circumstances required leadership transitions. The space colonization project was designed to be self-sustaining once established, reducing humanity's dependence on any single individual or institution for long-term survival. Las Vegas's governmental structure had evolved from personal rule toward institutional frameworks that could maintain stability and progress regardless of who occupied specific leadership positions. The philosophical implications of House's story extended far beyond the immediate political and economic changes he had accomplished in the Mojave Desert. He had demonstrated that individual vision and determination could reshape entire civilizations when combined with adequate resources and patient implementation of long-term strategies. But he had also revealed the complex moral challenges involved in pursuing idealistic objectives through methods that required practical compromises with human weaknesses and cultural limitations. House's approach to leadership had evolved significantly from his pre-war corporate mindset toward something more nuanced and responsive to human psychological needs. He had learned to balance efficiency with equity, progress with tradition, and individual achievement with community solidarity. The result was a form of governance that combined the best features of various political systems while avoiding their most serious weaknesses, the desert landscape surrounding Las Vegas had been transformed through careful environmental management that demonstrated humanity's potential for constructive rather than destructive relationships with natural systems. Reforestation projects using drought-resistant species had created green corridors that supported wildlife while providing recreational opportunities for urban populations. Solar collection facilities generated clean energy that powered both immediate needs and long-term industrial development. Water management systems ensured sustainable usage of the Colorado River's flow while maintaining the ecological balance that desert ecosystems required. As House reflected on the journey that had brought him from a pre-war businessman to the leader of humanity's expansion beyond Earth, he experienced a sense of completion that had eluded him throughout his adult life. The mathematical certainty that had driven his early career had given way to acceptance of uncertainty and complexity as inherent features of human existence. Success wasn't simply a matter of superior planning and resource optimization, but required understanding and cooperation with other individuals whose motivations and capabilities complemented his own. The stars visible through the lucky 38's windows represented destinations that human civilization would reach within House's lifetime, fulfilling dreams that had sustained him through centuries of preparation and struggle. But they also reminded him that the universe was vast beyond human comprehension, filled with challenges and opportunities that would require continuing adaptation and growth. House's achievements in preserving and developing Las Vegas were significant, but they were also just the beginning of a much larger story that would be written by future generations who inherited the foundation he had created. His vision of rational progress and technological advancement had taken root in institutions and communities that would continue growing long after his personal involvement had ended. The space colonies that would soon carry human civilization beyond Earth's atmosphere would preserve and extend the best aspects of human culture while leaving behind the limitations and conflicts that had characterized terrestrial existence. In the quiet moments between the celebration and planning that filled his days, House sometimes wondered whether the young man who had started RobCo Industries in the early 21st century could have imagined the scope of what his ambitions would ultimately achieve. The answer, he knew, was both yes and no. The vision had always been there, but the human understanding necessary to implement it had developed only through decades of experience, failure, and gradual wisdom that no amount of preparation could have provided in advance. The desert night embraced Las Vegas with the same eternal patience it had shown for millennia, indifferent to human ambition, but somehow protective of those who respected its harsh beauty and unforgiving honesty. Under those ancient stars, Robert House's greatest gamble had paid off in ways that would echo through the centuries, carrying humanity toward a future that was both unimaginably different from the past and fundamentally continuous with the best aspirations that had always defined the human spirit. Moral and practical challenges involved in implementing visionary leadership in democratic societies that valued individual autonomy alongside collective progress. The space colonization project remained years or decades away from practical implementation, but House had created the political and economic infrastructure necessary for serious attempts at interplanetary expansion. Whether humanity would ultimately embrace his vision of multi-world civilization or develop alternative approaches to long-term survival remained to be determined by future generations, who would inherit both the benefits and responsibilities of the world House had fought so long to create.